Graduation day was supposed to be one of those rare moments where pride and accomplishment danced together, where families cheered and cameras clicked, where I, Clara Johnson, would finally feel seen. But as I walked into the restaurant, dressed in my modest gown and clutching my diploma case, the first thing that greeted me wasn't applause or congratulations. It was the faint smell of perfume, the subtle shimmer of wealth, and my parents' carefully curated indifference. My father, Robert Johnson, stood near the entrance with the posture of a man who managed wealth portfolios for Chicago's elite. His tailored suit was immaculate, as if every thread were a reminder of the success he demanded from those around him. My mother, Elaine, glided past, her charity gala aura intact, even in the middle of a private dinner. Her smile was polite, measured, rehearsed, the kind that looked better in photographs than it felt in real life. And then there was Vivian, my sister, standing taller than me in designer heels, phone raised to capture the scene. "Let's record this moment," she said, her tone dripping with amusement, like she was about to capture some rare comedy act. I felt the envelope before I saw it. Its crisp edges poked at the fabric of my dress as my mother handed it over with a faint smile. My parents had gifted me something for my graduation. I unfolded the envelope slowly, deliberately, savoring the silence that followed. Inside, on a single sheet of perfectly white paper, were words I had both expected and dreaded. "We hereby disown Clara Johnson, effective immediately." I read it once, twice. My heart didn't thump. My hands didn't shake. There was no dramatic collapse to the floor, no tearful confession. Nothing. Perhaps because I had already mourned this family long ago. Every dinner where silence was my only companion, every glance that whispered I was the afterthought, every achievement met with polite disinterest. They had all prepared me for this moment. I folded the paper neatly and slid it into my bag. Looking up, I gave them a soft, calm smile. "Thank you," I said. "This gift makes everything clear." I pushed back my chair, the scrape echoing across the restaurant like a small announcement of independence, and stood. Their forced laughter and Vivian's ongoing recording were meaningless. They thought I was walking away in shame. But the truth was far simpler. I was walking toward the life they could never touch, one that no signature could erase. Growing up in the Johnson household was like living inside a gilded cage. Reputation was currency, and affection was conditional. My father, with his portfolio of high-net-worth clients, believed success was measured in numbers, not love. My mother, a woman who could host gala dinners with the quiet elegance of a string quartet, judged life in appearances. And Vivian? She was their masterpiece, a corporate lawyer engaged to the son of an employee, established family. And me? Clara Johnson, the unfinished sketch, the failure disguised as potential, the quiet daughter who no amount of achievement could redeem in their eyes. Dinner parties were exercises in subtle humiliation. My mother would glide through the introductions as though reading from a script perfected over decades. "Vivian is a senior associate at a Manhattan law firm," she'd say, hand resting on my sister's shoulder, pride dripping from every syllable. Then she'd turn toward me with polite indifference. "And Clara? Well, she's still studying for her MBA. Guests nodded, their smiles tight. It was a silent acknowledgement that being me was a social inconvenience. I tried, of course. I worked harder, studied longer, and pushed myself, hoping that one day my achievements would finally matter. But in our house, accolades without prestige didn't exist. My part-time job at a local coffee shop, the one that kept my rent paid and me fed, was invisible. My father once sniffed in mock disapproval. "No daughter of mine should smell like espresso." He meant it as a joke, but the wrinkle of his nose told me otherwise. Every Sunday dinner felt like an unspoken exam, questions about my grades, my progress, my future. They weren't curiosity. They were comparisons. "Still studying, Clara? Don't you think it's time you settled down?" my mother would say. Vivian, already working full-time, was the benchmark for approval. When I didn't answer, my father's sigh would fill the air as he refilled his wine glass, muttering, "Degrees don't pay bills. Success is measured by numbers, not paper." Love, I realized, in their house, was measured the same way, by return on investment. And since I had none to offer, I was expendable. So I learned to disappear. I came home only when necessary, gliding through dinners that felt more like corporate meetings than family gatherings. Vivian talked about wedding venues in the Hamptons. My parents discussed donors and dividends. I nodded at all the right moments, laughed when expected, smiled when necessary. Sometimes my mother would ask, in a soft but cutting tone, "Still at that little cafe? You must meet such interesting people there." The table would laugh, and I would too. Not laughing seemed to make it worse. There was a time I tried to speak about my research project, a data-driven logistics model I was developing, but it barely registered. "That's nice, dear," my mother said, blinking once before returning to Vivian's story. I realized then that affection in our house was a privilege granted only to those who reflected well on the family name. Outside that house, though, life was different. The hum of the coffee grinder, the chatter of students, the smell of roasted beans. It was real. I learned more behind that counter than at any dinner table. I learned to read people, manage chaos, and lead without a title. Sometimes, classmates would come into the shop asking for help on projects. I brainstormed, advised, and guided. They respected me in ways my own family never had. At night, I walked back to my small apartment, city lights glimmering on the river, feeling alive. I brewed one last cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and worked until sunrise, each keystroke a promise to myself. I did not need their approval to exist. Yet the old tension lingered. Every family message, every photo of Vivian's new condo, or her fiancé's smiling face at a charity event, reminded me of my exclusion. Their pride never touched me. Awards, scholarships, published papers, they did not count. To them, I was simply the quiet daughter who hadn't figured it out. And as I reached my final semester, I stopped trying. I still attended dinners when invited, still smiled when introduced as the one still studying, but inside, I had shifted. Shame had turned into distance. Cold, lonely distance, but distance that tasted like freedom. During my second year, everything began to change. I received a nationwide research scholarship, one of only 5 awarded. My professor praised not just the project, but the way I led my team. "You've got something rare, Clara," he said. "You make people believe in the impossible." That night I texted my parents, inviting them to my awards ceremony. As expected, my mother replied with a curt, "So proud, sweetheart, but we have a charity gala tonight." My father added, "Big night for your mother's donors. Take photos." I stood on stage at the University Hall, name echoing through the room, applause washing over me. I pictured their faces, absent in the crowd, and realized I no longer needed them to validate my existence. My phone buzzed with a single message from my mother, hours later. Beautiful. Just one word. No questions. No pride. Just polite acknowledgement, like I was a chair in the room. That was the moment I stopped sending photos. The quiet sting of neglect became my fuel. Every insult, every dismissal, every comparison was transformed into determination. I would build a life that they could neither understand nor touch. And as I walked out of that restaurant, diploma in hand, letter in bag, and a calm smile on my face, I finally felt it. Freedom. This was not shame. This was liberation, and it was mine. After graduation, life didn't suddenly become easier. If anything, it exposed the cracks I had long tried to ignore. The Johnson household, with its polished floors and curated smiles, remained unchanged. Vivian's successes continued to dominate every conversation. Every glass clink at dinner was a reminder of my insignificance. I had always been the invisible daughter. Growing up, I quickly learned the rules. Never outshine Vivian. Never expect applause for quiet accomplishments. Never believe your achievements mattered unless they glittered in society's eyes. My father, Robert Johnson, evaluated everything numerically, from grades to social influence. "Numbers speak louder than words," he would say, sipping his Bordeaux while observing me with faint irritation. My mother, Elaine, measured love in optics. She wanted reflections of prestige, not authenticity. And Vivian, she was the reflection they approved of. A perfectly sculpted daughter who could charm a room without trying. My own efforts, no matter how substantial, were always insufficient. I remember the first time I presented a school project in middle school. My mother nodded once, then smiled at Vivian. "Clara is creative," she said, as if handing me a token for minimal effort. Creative wasn't enough. In this house, words were measured like currency, and I had no wealth to trade. By the time I was a teenager, I had mastered the art of disappearing. I arrived home only when necessary, seated myself quietly during dinners, and spoke only when spoken to. Vivian would narrate her growing list of achievements: school, internships, social recognition, and my parents would listen, absorbed. When I tried to share a personal milestone, like the first essay I published in a college journal, their eyes would glaze over. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, before returning to Vivian's story of winning a moot court. I learned that my existence had become a background noise, an afterthought. The house smelled of cedar, cinnamon, and cold wealth, but never warmth. Family photos lined the halls, but I was cropped out, placed in corners or shadows. Maybe it was bad framing, or maybe deliberate. Either way, I realized that my absence improved the picture. The Johnson family looked perfect because I wasn't fully in the frame. I sought solace outside of home. The local coffee shop became my sanctuary, a world apart from the sterile expectations of my family. The hum of the espresso machine, the smell of roasted beans, and the soft chatter of students provided a rhythm I could understand. Here, my worth wasn't judged by pedigree or accolades. I learned quickly how to read people, how to anticipate needs, and how to lead without authority. I helped classmates brainstorm business ideas between orders and discovered that guidance and mentorship could flourish anywhere, not just in a home obsessed with appearances. Even as I thrived outside the house, I still felt the tug of loneliness. Holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving meant driving home, exhausted from shifts, hoping for a moment of recognition. My parents' eyes would barely glance at my achievements. "To our family's shining star," my mother would toast, pointing at Vivian. I would smile, nod, and remind myself that resentment didn't feed me, it ate me. Despite their neglect, I began to cultivate quiet defiance. Each slight and dismissal from my family became a motivator. If I was deemed insignificant, I would prove that my life mattered anyway. I studied harder, took on additional shifts at the cafe, and poured myself into academic projects. My MBA research became a refuge. I was building something meaningful, even if no one at home noticed. My sense of invisibility sharpened my focus. Every conversation with Vivian about wedding venues or job promotions reminded me of what I wasn't, but also what I could become on my own. I started to understand that love in our house was transactional. It was conditional, given only to those who reflected the family name favorably. I had nothing to trade, and that realization freed me. By the second year of my MBA, I was exhausted, but I also discovered pride in my own capabilities. I received a scholarship that placed me among the top 5 students nationwide. My professor, Dr. Peterson, praised not just my work, but the leadership I showed guiding my team. "You have a rare talent, Clara," he said. "You make people believe in the impossible." It was a small spark, but a life-changing one. Here, at last, was recognition based on merit, not family connections. My parents' indifference had taught me to seek validation elsewhere. I sent them an invitation to my awards ceremony, and as expected, the replies were distant. My mother, tied up with a charity gala, and my father, absorbed in donor obligations. They could not witness the moment without it reflecting on their image, not on me. Standing on the stage, I felt both pride and emptiness. Applause echoed, cameras flashed, yet the absence of familial presence was palpable. Still, for the first time, I realized that absence didn't define me. My worth wasn't contingent on recognition from those who had conditioned me to feel small. I had discovered autonomy, the power to validate my own achievements, and the freedom to pursue what mattered to me. The Johnson household continued its patterns, but I had changed. I attended dinners only when necessary, smiled when polite, but inside, I nurtured a growing sense of independence. I was invisible at home, yes, but outside I was emerging, a quiet force building towards something greater. Each dismissal and comparison became fuel, a quiet insistence that my life mattered and I would prove it, not for them, but for me. By the time my second year ended, I had become adept at balancing 2 worlds. The house remained a museum of perfection, Vivian the golden daughter, my parents the gatekeepers of conditional love. Yet outside, I had cultivated respect, skills, and the beginnings of a future I could claim without apology. Each quiet victory, every late night at the coffee shop, every project completed with diligence, was a step away from the shadow of a family who could not see me. Invisibility, I discovered, could be powerful. It taught patience, endurance, and resilience. I learned that absence, when wielded intentionally, could become my ally. While they continued to measure love in optics and numbers, I was crafting a life defined on my own terms. And though loneliness whispered in the dark hours, I began to understand that independence, even when forged through neglect, was liberating. That winter, as snow fell over Chicago's skyline, I walked home from the cafe, city lights reflecting on the icy river. For the first time in years, I felt a small, steady pulse of hope. The Johnsons would continue to exist in their world of prestige, but I had discovered my own. And in that discovery, I realized that sometimes the very thing you think breaks you, being unseen, unloved, dismissed, is exactly what prepares you to rise. By the time I closed my laptop that night, exhaustion had settled into a calm satisfaction. My projects were progressing. My scholarship work was being recognized. And while my family remained unaware, I was finally learning what it meant to matter, to myself. The invisible daughter, the one who had long been overlooked, was beginning to define her own legacy. And nothing in their world could touch that. By the time I reached my third year in the MBA program, I had grown accustomed to the quiet rhythm of being invisible in my own family while thriving outside it. The dichotomy was strange, almost surreal. At home, I was a footnote, a polite afterthought whose successes were minimized or ignored. Outside, I was a force quietly building, shaping projects, earning respect, and discovering that my abilities had value independent of my family's approval. It was during one of these ordinary Tuesdays, the kind where campus felt more like a sanctuary than anywhere else, that Dr. Peterson called my name after class. He was a tall man in his 60s, with glasses perched delicately on the bridge of his nose and an aura of quiet authority. Unlike my parents, he saw potential where others only counted numbers. "Clara," he said, adjusting his glasses, "your analysis in today's case study, it's remarkable. You don't just see the numbers, you see the people behind them." I blinked, unprepared for praise. Compliments weren't something I received often, certainly not from someone who truly understood their weight. He gestured toward my presentation slides still projected on the classroom screen. Lines of data formed clean, dynamic patterns. My team's work was displayed visually in a way that captured both efficiency and empathy, optimization with humanity embedded in it. He continued, "You've organized a team of 6 and predicted distribution efficiency down to 0.1%. That's not just math. That's leadership. Have you considered presenting this at the Student Startup Symposium next month?" I laughed softly, partly in disbelief. "Me? I don't think I'm ready," I said carefully, trying not to sound ungrateful. He smiled in that patient, knowing way that only mentors seem to have. "Perfection is just fear dressed up nicely, Clara. Apply. You might surprise yourself." That evening, back in my small apartment, I stared at the application form on my laptop. The cursor blinked at me in quiet accusation. Team name? I paused. For years, my ideas had been dismissed as trivial, unworthy, or impractical. I had been the quiet one, the invisible daughter. And now, here was a chance not just to prove something to others, but to finally test the limits of my own potential. I reached out to 2 classmates I trusted implicitly. Ryan, a quietly witty data analyst who could spot patterns I missed, and Leia, a UX designer whose sense of aesthetics could turn even dry data into something beautiful. Within days, we formed our team. I had a vision, a system that could help small businesses optimize shipping routes in real time, a platform that used data to reduce costs, improve efficiency, and make logistics accessible to anyone, not just giant corporations. The project, which we named PathLink, quickly transformed my apartment into a command center. The once empty table became a chaotic mosaic of laptops, notebooks, sticky notes, and coffee cups. Every surface was covered with diagrams, spreadsheets, color-coded markers, and printed research papers. Sleep became optional. My team and I worked through the night, fueled by caffeine, adrenaline, and a sense of purpose I had never felt at home. PathLink wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a charity gala or a portfolio worth showing off at family dinners. but it was mine. Every algorithm I wrote, every logistic model I tested, was a testament to my capabilities, proof that the quiet, invisible daughter could create something that mattered. Meanwhile, my family continued their ritual of indifference. Photos of Vivian's condo, her engagement parties, charity gala appearances, they filled my phone, sent with captions like, "So proud of our shining star." I stopped opening them after a while. The pride they displayed was for appearances, not for me. But I didn't let that sting turn into bitterness. I used it as fuel. Every comparison, every slight, every reminder that I was still studying became motivation to work harder, smarter, and more creatively. There were nights when exhaustion gnawed at me. At 3 a.m., scrolling through family photos online, I would feel the familiar pang of isolation. Vivian in designer gowns, my parents clinking champagne flutes at charity events. It was a stark reminder of the life I didn't belong to. But then I would remind myself, their world was not my measure. I had already begun to define success on my own terms. With PathLink, I had something tangible, something that didn't rely on anyone's approval. It was a system I could touch, a project that responded to effort and intelligence, not social optics. I worked with Ryan and Leia to model shipping routes, predict fuel costs, and develop a clean, user-friendly interface. We tested our system with small local businesses. Every time a client told us the platform saved them time, money, or frustration, it felt like a quiet, personal triumph. This was recognition of a kind my family would never give me, validation for the hours I had spent building skills that mattered in the real world. The turning point was subtle, almost unnoticed. I found myself smiling at the glow of my laptop screen at midnight, instead of feeling the gnawing emptiness of family neglect. The joy wasn't flashy. It didn't come with applause or social media likes. It was private, internal, and deeply satisfying. I was learning that success without approval was possible, and in some ways far more meaningful. Even at school, I noticed the shift. Classmates who had once treated me as quiet or unassuming now sought my opinion. Ryan trusted my analytics instincts. Leia followed my lead in UX decisions. I was no longer invisible. I was emerging as a leader, not the kind praised by family photo albums, but the kind respected for competence, insight, and integrity. By the end of the semester, PathLink had become more than a class project. We were approaching real-world application, testing algorithms with actual delivery data from small businesses. I found that I thrived under responsibility and challenge, and every success reminded me that my family's dismissal had no bearing on my capabilities. In fact, their neglect had inadvertently fueled my determination. I was building, leading, and proving to myself every day that my life could be defined on my own terms. And yet, in quiet moments, loneliness still whispered. I missed something intangible, a parental word of pride, a genuine smile from my mother, a simple acknowledgement from my father. But those things no longer controlled me. I had begun to build my own measure of worth, independent of their approval. That winter, as snow blanketed Chicago, I walked home from the cafe with PathLink plans in my bag and hope in my heart. Vivian might still be the family's shining star, and my parents might continue to prioritize appearances, but I had discovered a new rhythm, a life where achievement and recognition were my own. Every late night, every line of code, every optimized route was proof that I mattered, and that my invisibility at home was no longer a limitation. It was my secret weapon. I had begun to recognize something profound. The world outside my family could see my value, even if they could not. And in that recognition, I started to believe in the impossible, that I could eventually surpass not just their expectations, but the very limitations they had placed on me. The days after forming the PathLink team were some of the most intense of my life. My apartment had become a war room. Laptops littered the table, sticky notes covered every available wall, and half-empty coffee cups formed precarious towers in every corner. The smell of espresso and late-night snacks was constant, a reminder that the work we were doing demanded both dedication and sacrifice. Ryan, our data analyst, was quiet but meticulous. He had a talent for seeing patterns where I saw chaos. Leia, our UX designer, brought a rare mix of creativity and precision, turning my sometimes messy spreadsheets into interfaces that were not only functional, but elegant. And me? I was the bridge, the planner, the leader, the one who ensured that numbers, design, and strategy all aligned toward a common goal. Every night was a blur of coding, testing, and refining. I would arrive home after my shifts at the cafe, often around midnight, and dive straight into Pathlink work. By 3 a.m., my apartment lights would be the only ones on in the surrounding block. I would pace, muttering to myself over formulas and logistics equations, tweaking routes, recalculating fuel efficiency, and testing scenarios over and over. Sleep became optional, replaced by the adrenaline of creation. Pathlink was ambitious. We wanted to take the small businesses overlooked by big corporations and give them access to the same logistics tools that giants like FedEx and UPS used. I imagined a florist in Chicago optimizing deliveries during the holidays, a small bakery reaching more clients without breaking the bank, a startup reducing fuel costs and increasing efficiency, all because of our work. Every calculation, every algorithm update, every test run was a small victory, proof that our idea wasn't just theoretical. It could change real lives. But ambition comes with its challenges. There were moments when I wanted to throw the laptop across the room. Algorithms would fail, data would refuse to cooperate, and our models would produce results that made no sense. Ryan would sigh and rub his temples, Leia would bite her lip, and I would pace until clarity returned. Some nights, frustration threatened to swallow our progress. I thought back to my parents' words, their dismissals, their constant comparisons to Vivian, and I realized something. Each setback in Pathlink was nothing compared to the years I had spent being underestimated at home. I had been preparing for this, even unknowingly. The lessons learned from invisibility, neglect, and dismissal had taught me resilience. Each failed algorithm became a challenge I was ready to conquer. Every glitch in the system was a puzzle waiting for a solution. And slowly, methodically, Pathlink began to take shape. We divided responsibilities meticulously. Ryan handled the back-end data structure, ensuring the system could process real-time updates without crashing. Leia focused on the front end, designing dashboards that were clean, intuitive, and visually compelling. I managed the project timeline, coordinated testing, and liaised with local business owners willing to pilot our system. The apartment became a hub of collaboration, debate, and creativity. We argued, laughed, and occasionally cried, but always worked toward the same goal. The first time a small business used our prototype and reported measurable savings, I felt something I had rarely experienced: unfiltered pride. It wasn't about recognition from family or society. It wasn't a diploma or a certificate. It was real, tangible impact. A florist told us she saved hours in deliveries during a single week. A bakery owner told us she could expand her business because our routing system reduced fuel costs. For the first time, my work mattered in the world, and the effect was immediate and undeniable. Even as I thrived in Pathlink, the family dynamics still lingered in the background. Messages from my mother about Vivian's new condo, her fiancé's charity work, or their pride in their golden daughter would appear on my phone. I stopped reading them. Their approval no longer had the power to define me. Each dismissal, once a source of pain, had been converted into fuel for my ambition. I had learned the most important lesson. If they saw me as a failure, I would turn that failure into foundation. Our nights at the apartment became longer. I remember one particularly grueling week when we had to run simulations for over 40 scenarios, each more complex than the last. I fell asleep on the couch with a notebook on my chest, only to wake a few hours later and dive right back into work. Ryan and Leia, equally exhausted, were a silent testament to the shared dedication that had replaced the empty validation of my family. We were building not just a system, but a team, a microcosm of trust, respect, and purpose I had never experienced at home. We encountered technical setbacks, of course. Algorithms produced inefficiencies we hadn't anticipated. Data from clients was incomplete or inconsistent. Some nights I questioned whether the project would ever work. But each problem required a solution, and for the first time, I felt confident in my ability to solve it. Unlike at home, where my intelligence and achievements were ignored, here they were essential. My input mattered. My leadership mattered. My persistence mattered. There were moments when I felt the ghost of loneliness creeping in. I would sit at my desk after a long day, Pathlink models glowing on my screen, and wonder if I would ever be fully celebrated, acknowledged, or loved. But those moments were fleeting. I reminded myself that recognition was no longer external, it was internal. Every line of code, every routing optimization, every successful test was validation enough. I was building my own world, one where my skills, effort, and intelligence defined me. Pathlink's beta tests gradually expanded. We added more, local businesses refined the algorithm, and improved the user interface. Each improvement was a testament to teamwork and perseverance. I began to see that success wasn't a family endorsement. It was the quiet accumulation of effort, resilience, and ingenuity. And as we neared a launch-ready prototype, I realized something profound. The very circumstances that had made me feel small, neglect, comparison, invisibility, had prepared me for this. I was no longer a daughter seeking approval. I was a creator, a leader, an innovator. At night, when the city outside glimmered under streetlights, I would sit on my balcony with a cup of coffee, reflecting on how far I had come. Pathlink was more than a project. It was a declaration. It was proof that I could build, lead, and create impact without anyone's validation. My parents' disapproval, once a source of shame, had become irrelevant. I had discovered that self-worth is forged in action, not in applause. By the end of the semester, Pathlink was functional, tested, and ready for broader implementation. Our system could analyze routes, reduce fuel costs, and optimize delivery schedules for small businesses, giving them tools previously reserved for corporate giants. For the first time, I felt complete satisfaction, not the fleeting validation of family recognition, but the deep, enduring fulfillment of creating something real, meaningful, and impactful. I had taken the lessons of my past, the invisibility, the dismissals, the endless comparisons, and transformed them into a foundation. Each slight, each hurtful remark, each ignored achievement had become fuel for determination. I realized that the life I was building now, defined on my own terms, was more rewarding than any accolade my family could ever bestow. The apartment, once a temporary living space, had become a symbol of perseverance. Pathlink was no longer just a project. It was a testament to independence, to resilience, and to the quiet power of proving oneself in a world that doesn't always notice. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged. Not in a house, not in a family, but in the life I was creating for myself. The invisible daughter was no more. She had become a force, quietly unstoppable, building a legacy far beyond the walls that had once confined her. The morning sun streamed through my apartment window, bouncing off the stacks of notebooks and laptops that had been my companions for months. Pathlink was finally ready. Our beta tests were complete, algorithms optimized, and interface polished to perfection. The late nights, caffeine-fueled brainstorming sessions, and countless setbacks had culminated in a tool that could genuinely change lives. And yet, as I sat there sipping my morning coffee, I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and calm. I thought of my parents, of Vivian, of every dinner where I had been invisible, every whispered comparison, every unspoken expectation that I would never measure up. I remembered the Disownment letter on graduation day, the one that had felt like both rejection and liberation. At the time, I had thought it marked the end of something painful. Now I understood. It had marked the beginning of everything that truly mattered. Launching Pathlink wasn't about proving anything to my family anymore. It was about validating my own efforts, my own worth, and my own vision. Yet for a moment, I wondered what it would feel like if they were there. Would they notice the sleek interface, the efficiency improvements, the businesses we were about to empower? I imagined their polite, indifferent reactions and chuckled. It didn't matter. I no longer needed their recognition. Ryan and Leia arrived at the apartment early, each carrying their own brand of excitement. Ryan had printed out the final analytics report, showing the exact savings for each business in the beta program. Leia had color-coded the UI guide and prepared a presentation for potential investors. We gathered around the table, a sense of accomplishment washing over us. Pathlink was no longer a project. It was a reality. We launched quietly, reaching out to small businesses through our contacts, letting them discover the platform organically. The response was immediate and gratifying. A boutique bakery in Chicago reported that their delivery times had decreased by 20%. A flower shop owner, juggling 3 locations, told us she could finally expand her customer base without additional staffing costs. Feedback poured in, positive, detailed, and heartfelt. Each success felt personal. Each confirmation that our work mattered resonated in a way that no family dinner or charity gala ever could. As I sat back and absorbed the moment, I reflected on the lessons that had brought me here. I had been underestimated, dismissed, and ignored for years. I had grown up in a household where affection was conditional, where accomplishments only mattered if they enhanced someone else's image. I had been invisible in my own family, a quiet daughter overshadowed by a golden sister and parents obsessed with appearances. And yet those very experiences had prepared me for this life, the life I had created on my own. For the first time, I felt fully in control. Every decision I made, every algorithm I coded, every strategy I implemented was mine. No one could diminish it. No one could take it away. I realized that independence isn't just financial or professional. It's emotional, too. The freedom to build, to innovate, to grow without seeking approval is a kind of power I had only begun to understand. Despite the success, there were quiet moments when I still thought of my family. Not with longing, but with clarity. I understood that they could never see the world the way I did. They could never value the quiet victories, the unseen effort, the resilience born of neglect. Their vision of success was rigid, limited, and never included me, and that was fine. I no longer needed to fit into their framework. I had my own. The turning point came when we secured our first external investor, a small venture capitalist who believed in our mission. He asked for a demonstration, and as I guided him through the interface, explaining the algorithms and showing real-time data improvements, I noticed something remarkable. For the first time in my professional life, I felt fully recognized, fully respected, and fully capable. This wasn't applause on a stage or polite acknowledgement from a family member. This was validation from people who understood, who valued substance over appearances. Evenings became a celebration of achievement rather than endurance. I would make myself a cup of coffee, sit by the window overlooking the city lights reflecting on the river, and watch as emails came in from businesses using Pathlink. Each note of gratitude, each success story, was a quiet confirmation that my work was meaningful. I began to realize that recognition from the world outside my family carried more weight than anything I had sought from them. Vivian continued her golden daughter trajectory, attending galas, receiving accolades, and maintaining appearances. My parents continued their life of curated perfection, hosting fundraisers and charming donors. And me? I had built a life they could never touch. I had created a reality that was independent, impactful, and wholly mine. I no longer measured my worth against their standards. I had discovered that worth is defined by effort, resilience, and the ability to create change, not by comparisons or conditional affection. The months passed, and Pathlink continued to grow. Ryan and Leia became partners in the truest sense, collaborators, friends, and co-creators. Together, we expanded to additional cities, integrating more businesses into the platform. Each step forward was a reminder that I could thrive without validation from the people who had once made me feel small. One evening, as we celebrated the first 100 businesses onboarded, I took a moment to reflect. The invisible daughter who had sat silently at countless dinners, the ignored scholar, the overlooked achiever, I had transformed her into a woman who was confident, respected, and unstoppable. Pathlink wasn't just a logistics platform. It was a symbol of every slight converted into determination, every dismissal turned into fuel. And then I thought of the disownment letter, that crisp piece of paper that once seemed like rejection. Now I understood it for what it truly was, a liberation. That single sheet of paper had clarified everything. It didn't diminish me, it freed me. It allowed me to walk away from a family that could not love me unconditionally and toward a life they could never reach. I had discovered that independence is not just a privilege, it is a right earned through perseverance. Every late night, every challenge, every line of code had brought me here. And as I stood on the balcony, city lights shimmering below, I knew one thing with certainty. My life belonged to me, and no signature, no opinion, No family expectation could ever take that away. The journey had been painful, lonely, and challenging, but it had also been transformative. I had learned that love and validation are not always given. They can be created through action, resilience, and self-belief. I had built a life that mattered, and in doing so, I had built myself. I smiled, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes for a moment. I was no longer the invisible daughter, no longer the overlooked one. I was Clara Johnson, creator, leader, innovator, unstoppable. And for the first time in my life, I was completely, irreversibly free.